So big day today from our friends at Canon. We have a whole bunch of stuff that is coming out, including the official announcement finally for the R3. I've got all the details. I want to go through all these. Let's save the R3 for a second. I want to talk about some lenses. So first up, we have the RF 16mm f2.8 STM. So they're saying the size on this is comparable to the RF 50 f1.8. It's lightweight, ultra wide angle with a minimum focus distance of 5.1 inches, and it's going to retail at $299 USD. Okay, so this is the 50mm f1.8. They're saying the 16mm is going to be about this size. This is sitting on my R5. You can imagine that this is going to be extremely useful for people who are doing video, YouTube types of things like this, or doing vlogging. It's going to be super compact. I am actually very excited about this lens, and the price is right. Second lens we have is a zoom. It is the RF 100 to 400mm f5.6 to 8 IS-USM. So this is pretty compact and lightweight for a lens at this range. It features optical image stabilization up to 5.5 stops. And when you pair this up with an EOS R camera that has in-body image stabilization, you're going to get up to 6 stops. It also has a 9-blade circular aperture for that nice round bokeh when you stop down. It features a control ring, and it is also compatible with the 1.4x and 2x RF extenders. There's a few accessories also, most notably the Speedlight transmitter ST10, as well as a stereo microphone, the DME1D. The stereo microphone is completely wireless. It works within the hot shoe, so it's sort of like what we've seen with Sony recently with these kind of wireless microphones, and it's going to be perfect for people who are doing filmmaking or vlogging. So let's get to the reason that you're watching this video, which is to hear about the Canon EOS R3. So this is not going to be an in-depth spec thing. You can go read all of the specs on their website. I want to talk about some of the key highlights, and I want to offer some of my opinions on these. So at first look, who is this camera for? So this is targeted towards sports, action, photojournalism, wildlife photographers, photographers who have the need for a high-speed, high-performance camera. So first off the bat, you're going to notice that we've got an integrated grip design, fully articulating screen, dual card slots. It's going to be SD and CF Express. It also uses an LPE19 battery like we saw on the 1DX series. In my briefing with Canon, they told me that this camera is actually surprisingly lightweight for a camera of this size with the integrated grip design. So this is something I'm actually really looking forward to seeing, because a camera this size you expect to be somewhat heavier, much like a DSLR, but they're saying that is not the case. Another cool thing is this camera is not designed to compete with the R5 or the 1DX Mark III necessarily, but the emphasis of this camera is going to be on autofocus subject tracking, continuous shooting, high sensitivity, and low light autofocus. Now what I love is that Canon are not just repackaging a 1DX Mark III into a mirrorless body. They're going to see that they've actually gone way beyond all of that. Sure, there are going to be photographers out there who just prefer DSLRs. They like the optical viewfinder. They also like the battery life, and that's a big difference. With a DSLR, your battery is only active at the moment of capture or the moment of metering. With a mirrorless, your battery is pretty much active all of the time because it's driving the electronic viewfinder or the back screen. So it's a huge difference. So battery life is going to be a challenge, and they're still going to make the 1DX Mark III for photographers who just prefer that. But we now have blackout shooting, extreme high frame rates. This is going to be a really exciting camera, I think, for a lot of people. So the biggest new feature here is going to be the new sensor and its paired processor, the Digic X. So this is a backside illuminated stacked configuration CMOS sensor that comes in at 24 megapixels. You may be asking, why 24 megapixels? Canon have been delivering cameras with much higher pixel counts. Well, this camera is targeted towards sports photographers, photojournalists, professionals who deliver in the field. In other words, they're taking images and it's going straight up to an FTP server so they can be in the moment. A lot of those photographers are still working in JPEG. This is why you've seen the other competing cameras such as Sony with the A9, the A9 II, and even the A1, which will shoot at a lighter resolution in JPEG format. You're able to take a much smaller file and just work with that. Plus, there are other advantages too in terms of speed and also low light performance. When you're using the electronic shutter for continuous shooting, you're going to get up to 30 frames per second with minimum rolling distortion. It also gives you 14-bit RAW recording, as well as finally blackout-free continuous shooting. Autofocus calculations and tracking go up to 60 frames a second during shooting, and sensitivity will give you up to ISO 120,400 for stills. How usable it is at that high an ISO setting remains to be seen. I haven't actually had a chance to shoot with the camera yet, but it's going to be pretty interesting to see what kind of performance we're able to get out of this in low light. And speaking of low light, Canon are saying that this camera will perform autofocus at an EV of -7. There's also been some improvements to the automatic white balance algorithm. Now, I would argue that if you shoot in RAW, this probably isn't a big deal to you because you have a lot of flexibility in post with a RAW file. However, if you're the type of photographer who's shooting and delivering professionally in the field, shooting JPEGs, this actually is a big deal. The improvements in this algorithm are more landscape-based in terms of like how grass is rendered or how trees are rendered. And we also now have the ability to control and actually save white balance settings right out of the live view. So this is kind of a new feature that I think is going to be very useful. Another feature that's very impressive is that when you're using electronic shutter and you're doing high-speed burst rate shooting, and I've done this a lot with Sony cameras, it has the fake shutter noise, so there's no disorientation of when you're holding down the shutter button because the camera is completely silent. So it's very weird when you turn all the audio signals off and you're shooting at burst rates like that. It's even weirder when you're shooting with flash, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Canon have implemented some options on this, so you can turn that sound on or off, and if you want the sound but you don't want to annoy other people with it, you can actually assign it just to the headphones only, and you can use earbuds or something like that when you're shooting, and that way only you can hear it. So it's kind of a nice little attention to detail. We have a new electronic viewfinder on this camera that was developed by Canon. So this is not something you're going to see on any other camera that's sort of been recycled. This is a 5.6 million dot OLED display that's capable of being set at either 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. So if you're one of those old school photographers who still likes your OLED viewfinder, this might be the viewfinder that converts you to mirrorless. So we'll see how that goes. So there are lots of autofocus improvements. This camera is going to be using the dual pixel CMOS AF2, and the detectable subjects have actually evolved from the R5 and R6 cameras. They're also introducing eye control autofocus for selecting subjects. So there have been some Canon cameras in the past that use eye detection. In other words, it's going to actually see where your eye is looking, and it's going to follow that in terms of autofocus. They were telling us in the briefing that this is actually a very different system than anything they've used before. So you've got sensors inside the viewfinder that are going to be watching for your eye. So the first really impressive thing about this is that you're going to have to calibrate it when you first get the camera. So there's a system to go through with calibration. Now, the reason that it does this, some people shoot with glasses, some people shoot with contact lenses, some people don't use either one. Maybe you share the camera with another photographer and you want to be able to calibrate it for two different eyes. And so you're actually able to save these as presets in the IAF configuration, and you're going to be able to recall these, and you can name each one of them. So if you're sharing the camera with somebody, you just bring up Dave's preset, or you go back to Ted's, or you say Ted with contacts, Ted with glasses. This is going to be really interesting to see how this works. So what it's going to do is it's going to work in tandem with the autofocus algorithm. So if you have multiple subjects in the frame, let's say, you'll be able to select each one depending on which one you're looking at. I'm really excited about this because this is something that no other camera has done, and it looks to be very promising. If you're considering this camera for video, we're not going to get 8K off of a 24 megapixel sensor, but if you don't mind 4K, I think you're going to be very impressed. So you can do 4K up to 120p. We've got Canon Log 3. It'll shoot RAW 6K up to 60p, HDR PQ. So one of the big questions I think a lot of people are going to have is about overheating, and that was a problem when the R5 came out, and it was a little bit of a drag. Well, this came up at my briefing as well. Canon are stating that up to 30p, there is no time limit and no overheating. Now, when you get into the higher frame rates, such as 4K 60 or 4K 120p, then you're going to have limitations on the recording, and you do have the option of actually switching over to a high temperature setting so you can get a little more time out. I will be honest, for somebody with a pretty conventional workflow like what I have with my YouTube channel, I film everything at 24p, and I will use 60p or 120p for B-roll. When I'm shooting B-roll, I'm not recording an hour or two in length, so I don't have any problems with the limitations that are set on this. I do need unlimited at standard 4K, which would be 24, 25, or maybe even 30p, and I think that's covered on this camera as well. And now for the really exciting specs for some people, our networking and security. Now remember, the EOS R3 is designed for professional photographers who are going to be delivering from the field. There's a ton of networking and security features in this camera, and I'm going to read these because there's no way I'm going to remember all the abbreviations. But you can do remote shooting, you can control remote settings and editing of IPTC tags using FTP. It's got voice memo, voice transfer, wired LAN of FTPS, SFTP, and HTTPS browser remote. It supports authenticated LAN, wireless LAN, FTPS, WPA2, and WPA3 personal and enterprise connections. Sorry, my IT days are well behind me, and there's a lot of stuff on here. Finally, a big feature if you've ever shot sports and you're indoors and you're dealing with LED lights and you're having issues with flicker, is that is actually very customizable on the EOS R3. So typically in the past, you know where the cycle is that you're trying to eliminate the flickering from. You set it at that cycle and you realize the lights aren't quite at that cycle and you're still having flickering. Well, you can now go into the settings on here and you can select like 100.0, 100.3, 100.6, and it's really fine-tuned. So if you're shooting a ball game and it's just got something that's really distracting in there that you're not able to work around, you'll probably be able to work around it with this camera. And finally, the price. This camera is going to come in at $5,999. It's going to be shipping by the end of November. So I actually think that this is a fairly impressive camera, at least on paper. I have not actually shot with one yet, full disclaimer. Because of COVID and supply chain stuff, they have not been able to get them out. I'm hoping to have a demo unit that I could do a review on. I'm actually really excited about what this camera is promising to do. The IAF feature alone is really compelling to me, as well as the high-speed shooting. I mean, there's a lot that this has to offer. Now, I do want to say something that I think is fairly important from my own viewpoint. Some of you will probably remember that back in 2019 when the EOS R was announced, I was very critical of Canon at that point. I thought the EOS R was kind of a weird camera. It was trying to push things, but they were things that nobody really needed, like the touch bar, and I don't know. I just thought it was a weird intro to mirrorless, and since then I've actually really warmed up to, and I've actually fallen in love with the EOS R system in general. You've got the EOS R, you've got the RP at a lower price point. I think the R5 and the R6 when they came out, I've been shooting on the R5, and I think this is a very capable camera. I know it's gotten a lot of criticism for overheating and the lack of useful 8K video. I don't ever shoot in 8K, and I don't really think anybody else does either. I know there's specialized applications, but I think that this camera kind of got a little bit of a bad rap out of the gate. It's actually a very capable camera, and I think that the EOS R3 is going to give us something that's even better, and the lens lineup has been outstanding. I think that Canon are this company that have a group of designers that are actually really excited about designing new lenses for a new mount and being able to do things that they weren't able to do on the previous EF mount system. And so all that is really exciting. And so I really can't wait to get my hands on an EOS R3 so I can share that with you. I would love to hear you guys' thoughts. And does this sound like something that's interesting? What do you think of the price point? Drop me a comment below. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Until then, later.